Hi, I'm Annette Oltmans, founder and CEO of the MEND Project. And in this workshop titled DARVO, When the Abuser Claims to be the Victim, I'm going to address specific manipulative tactics of DARVO, which it's an acronym that stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. And then I'm going to talk about its use in relationships. We're going to explore DARVO tactics, what DARVO does and its impact, and then what you can do to respond, or you can help somebody respond that's in your care. And finally, I'll share some responses to DARVO that will interrupt its use in your relationship. So I invite you to join us for this equipping and empowering discussion on DARVO as you navigate challenging relational dynamics, and it is challenging. All right, well, if you don't know me, my name is Annette Oltmans, and I'm founder and CEO of the MEND Project. In today's workshop, we do a workshop every month. Today, it's called DARVO, When the Abuser Claims to be the Victim. And we're going to delve into the tactic of DARVO, so you'll learn what it looks and sounds like, what it feels like. And if you're a responder or a people helper, this insight will add deeper understanding to help you identify when the perpetrator flips the scripts. And we're going to provide you with tools to help you be able to navigate when they flip it around and you are confused, because your ultimate responsibility is to align with the victim in the situation. Okay, so let's dive in. DARVO, D-A-R-V-O. This is an acronym that stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim with the offender. It's a manipulative tactic used by narcissists and abusers in general, and also people with personality disorders. And it's aimed to flip the problem around to avoid responsibility for their own harmful behavior, and thereby making it easier for the abuser to play that they are the ones who've been victimized. So in various forms of manipulation, taking on the role of victim rather than offender is a very common position that the true offender takes. They love playing the victim. When a narcissistic abuser denies having caused harm or being wrong, they will be unwilling to admit or acknowledge their behaviors. So this is what the D in DARVO is. They deny. And when they deny it, they're likely to minimize you or your perspective as you're explaining what took place. They're going to minimize your feelings, and they're going to say things like maybe, oh, come on, it wasn't that big a deal, or you're overreacting, or I never said that. And it's this rewriting of history, or trying to put an entirely different perspective on what you know instinctively was their true motive for saying what they said. When the narcissist or abuser, whatever term you want to use, is assigned responsibility, or in their eyes, they're being accused, they often interpret this as an attack on their character. So regardless of how thoughtfully you present your position, in response, they attack back, which is the A in DARVO. This can look like aggressive words and behavior, arguing, or it can be insults. They may threaten you. They may say random things about you to deflect from the true, the intent of the conversation. They're going to work hard to put serious doubt in your mind as the victim, or they may do this to you if you are the responder. They're going to mischaracterize the victim, and you will have a hard time knowing that you are sitting in front of someone and they are absolutely lying to you. But this is what their go-to position is. So it's so important for you to accept what the possibilities are that are playing out in front of you, rather than believing that everyone is like you and they're not going to lie. So you have to be completely prepared for that. In that case, you're likely to find yourself questioning yourself. If you're a responder, you may find yourself questioning the true victim's account of the story, which is very traumatizing for the victim. So you will find yourself saying, okay, am I being too hard on this person? Or maybe it's not what the victim actually said. And you start doubting yourself when someone is right in front of you lying and attacking the other person. So that's why you really need to fortify yourself and be prepared for what is likely to happen when you're dealing with a manipulator, an abuser, a narcissist, whatever terms you want to use. In the arguing with the victim, the abuser will work to flip roles and effectively reverse victim and offender, which is the RVO of DARVO. The abuser will argue that they are the victim and get the victim to look like the offender. And they do this so well, claiming they were treated unfairly, falsely accused, or in an effort to cover up poor behavior, they say, well, you did that, you caused it. No, that didn't happen. They'll just use so many different, and I'm going to get into those specifics in a minute. So it's incredibly common for victims to experience where the abuser is actually appearing calm and gaining sympathy, while the true victim appears completely out of sorts and unsettled while experiencing deep mental and emotional pain and chaos, because they're now being completely minimized and denied and being placed in the position of being the offender. And now they have to defend themselves, and their voice never got heard in the first place. It got completely flipped around. So it's really disconcerting and causes traumatic response, that fight, flight, freeze, or appease response. So before I provide examples of what DARVO can look and sound like, I want to share a study with you that supports how incredibly important having the conversation about DARVO is today. In 2023, Sarah J. Harsey and Jennifer J. Freed published research in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence. Jennifer Freed is an American psychologist, researcher, author, and educator known for her research and voice on betrayal trauma, on DARVO, and on institutional betrayal. And I want to read directly from the abstract to communicate just why this is so important. I thought this was really interesting. Quote, the purpose of the study was to measure the influence of DARVO and other manipulative tactic, insincere perpetrator apologies, and things like that on observers' judgments of a victim. So they want to measure the influence that DARVO or other manipulative tactics or insincere apologies by the perpetrator has on the observer's ability to judge things accurately. So it could be the judgment of how a victim and perpetrator in a fictional sexual violence scenario, for example. So they prepared this experiment with a narrative, and then the perpetrator, DARVO, was experimentally manipulated by it via fictional vignettes to measure their impact on perceived perpetrator and victim abusiveness, responsibility, and believability. That's what it says. So data from 230 undergraduate students revealed that participants who were exposed to perpetrator DARVO rated the perpetrator as less abusive, 90% less responsible for the sexual assault, and more believable compared to participants who were exposed to a perpetrator who did not use DARVO. So DARVO exposed participants rated the victim as more abusive and less believable, and also expressed less willingness to punish the perpetrator and greater willingness to punish the victim. Insincere apologies had minimal impact on ratings. By promoting distrust in victims and less punitive views of perpetrators, DARVO might contribute to rape supporting outcomes such as victim blaming, greater victim distress, and low rates of rape reporting and perpetrator prosecution. So the reason that I'm mentioning this to you and why we're spending time on this topic today is that it's a commonly used tactic that is to the detriment of victims worldwide in various ways, whether it's domestic violence victims, sexual assault victims. DARVO has the profound effect of influencing others' views of an overall situation. It is an effective manipulative ploy. So let's explore what DARVO can look and sound like. Examples and tactics of DARVO can be found in our terms and definitions sheet that you can find on our website under tools and resources. And I'd like to cover several of those terms now. Okay, so the first term that I want to use is catastrophizing. Said another way, catastrophizing means blowing things out of proportion. The abuser blows out of proportion what the victim said or did, and then redefines the true meaning of the victim's words or the victim's motives. So, example, eating dinner at a restaurant together. The victim notices parents from their child's school walk in the restaurant, and she gets up to say hello. When she returns to the table, the abuser falsely accuses her of preferring to be with others more than she would like to be with her husband. In essence, the abuser is applying a false meaning to her friendly gesture. That would be an example. The next term I want to use is blame shifting. The abuser defensively ignores the reasonable request or concern that was brought to the abuser by the victim, and then flips the responsibility and blame onto the victim, which places the abuser in the victim's role. So there's so many different ways that blame shifting is employed. It could be that it's something simple like you raise a reasonable complaint or concern, and then they say, nothing I ever do makes you happy. And that might seem rather subtle, but they not only dismissed your reasonable concern, which you're going to feel the pain of being ignored. Then they say that nothing I do makes you happy, which is a blanket statement of contempt that it's impossible to please you. So that is a way to blame you when you're trying to bring a concern. But this happens there's so many different scenarios that blame shifting is employed. Scapegoating. Scapegoating is talking about how the abuser not only ignores the responsibility, but for whatever harmful dynamics that he or she is responsible for in the relationship, but they tell false narratives to others that place the real victim in the abuser's role and paint the actual abuser as a victim. So here's an example. The abuser tells others to please pray for the victim because she's acting unstable and is having a hard time coping with her responsibilities around the house. In reality, the victim has developed post-traumatic stress from ongoing emotional abuse, but the perpetrator paints the victim as the problem, so others will sympathize with the abuser. She's no longer able to do her housework. She's unstable. She needs prayer because she's not well. It paints her as being the problem. Another one would be weaponized joking, where the abuser makes a joke disparaging the victim. And jokes, people laugh and they laugh at inappropriate jokes too. But in this case, when the victim complains, the abuser blames her for taking the joke out of context or for being too sensitive, and deflects the responsibility for the poorly chosen joke. He changes the responsibility and places it on the victim for being too sensitive. So the victim gets insulted and gets blamed for being too sensitive. And it's an overwhelming experience. So that's another example. Deflection. The victim attempts to have a reasonable discussion about how he or she has been hurt or uncomfortable about something. And rather than addressing the topic, the abuser changes the topic entirely to another issue where he claims to have been victimized. So he or she could say, well, last week you did this or that, or let's say it was a chore that needed to be done around the house. Can you please wrap up we have company coming. Can you wrap up the hose in the backyard and do this or that to straighten things up? And then 3 hours later, it's still not done. And you say, I asked you to put the hose away. They're going to be here in 30 minutes. And you get, well, I took the trash out and you didn't thank me for that. So it's like they change the topic and make you seem like you are abusive, bossy, inappropriate, things of that nature. Okay, another term is playing the victim. And that's obvious because DARVO is an extreme example of how they play the victim. But I'm just listing this behavior because I want you to know that abusers love to play the victim. In their mind, they're always feeling, it's like they have automatic negative thoughts, ants, where they are going to assume the worst. They're always going to be critical and like criticizing you or others while there's little self-reflection. And so that victim mentality comes from always feeling slighted and always expecting more and never really being content and happy. And so it plays out against the person on the receiving end. And it's really rather exhausting to always have to lift somebody else up, to have that person not lift you up. It's very one-sided and it's tiring. Okay, another term is false accusations. So he or she, the abuser, takes a thread of truth to avoid responsibility for harmful behavior. So they grossly distort the truth by rewriting the narrative and falsely accusing the victim of something that they didn't do, which not only places the victim on the hot seat to defend themselves, but places the actual abuser in the victim role. And this happens very often in couples therapy. And we've stated before many times in MEND workshops that couples therapy, when any form of abuse is present, is strictly contraindicated, meaning it's not advisable for a number of reasons. And you can go to a prior workshop where we talk about couples therapy and all the reasons why it's really damaging. But false accusation is, let's say there's a couple and they're eating dinner together and the one spouse says something really rude and is just completely ruins the whole opportunity to have a nice dinner. So the one on the receiving end is so used to this person being rude and they've just had it. So they get up and say, I'm going to go sit in the car and you can eat your dinner. Well, in a therapy session, a false accusation might be, she threw a fit and left dinner, or if it was a female victim. And all I did was said, blah, blah, blah. And so it paints the situation as though the victim is out of sorts, unreasonable, demanding. And then the victim has to sit there and explain everything the way it really happened, but the therapist is already perceiving her as being the problem. So it creates a lot of anxiety, false accusations. Can you imagine you're accused falsely of stealing something or of breaking something or of telling a lie? All of those things would cause you to have anxiety and say, no, that's not what happened. Let me explain to you what happened. And when somebody has been traumatized over and over again, false accusations create a lot of trauma. So I wanted to point that out. Another one is pathologizing. During a discussion or the victim's attempt to resolve a conflict, the abuser uses psychological terminology to assassinate the character of the victim. This is one of the things that happens when the abuser goes into couples therapy is they learn terminology and they learn the victim's vulnerabilities. And then they start using that terminology in an inappropriate way to mischaracterize the victim, shifting responsibility for the problem onto the victim or onto the victim's personality or onto the victim's character, so forth. So they basically act as though they have knowledge, but they're manipulating their knowledge as another tool to blame the victim. The next term I want to talk about is rationalization, where the abuser justifies their destructive behavior with excuses that have no validity. Each excuse is meant to characterize the victim's point of view as being overly judgmental or underappreciative, or basically the abuser falsely trades places with the victim in the conflict. So they're just going to say anything they can think of, and they're so good at it, of why they're not responsible and distort the truth and make the victim be responsible. So an example of this would be lying. The abuser has an affair and blames the victim for not being as sexually active or sexually explicit as the other partner's taste requires. Essentially, by saying that, the abuser is claiming to be the victim. My spouse won't appeal to my needs or desires. So that person is claiming to be the victim while justifying actions of infidelity. It's crazy. There is no excuse for infidelity, and it's a choice. I mean, there might be an excuse, but it is a choice. It is not the other person's fault that choice is being made. It's a conscious decision that they can choose to make or not choose to make, but they're responsible for their decision. And so to blame it, it's really a double injury on the victim when they're experiencing betrayal, trauma, and now they're being blamed for it. And unfortunately, a lot of faith leaders jump on the bandwagon of what the perpetrator is saying and find reasons to blame the victim for infidelity. Okay, the next one is power play and power over. And this is very common. So, for example, in financial abuse, he falsely accuses her of not being a financially responsible person. So he determines that he now has to take on additional responsibility to manage the finances to keep the couple financially safe, when in reality, it's a means to control and isolate the true victim, to take their power away. It's a way to power over them, to control finances and basically give her no access or no voice. She may be excluded from having her name on bank documents or investment documents and so forth. There's a wide gamut how extreme financial abuse will be. And it can have, it could be this much or much more of the pie. And it doesn't matter how little or much, it's very minimizing of the victim's voice and it's minimizing of equality, it's domineering, and it has a harmful effect on the victim. Okay, sanitization. She's just triggered. I didn't raise my voice that loudly. Sure, I was frustrated. She's just blaming me for something I didn't do because she's triggered and so overly sensitive, placing him in the victim role. Like, I have to deal with this overreactor all the time. So you can see how through all of these terms and definitions that these examples can be really subtle, but so influential. They can really influence a listener, and they can actually influence the victim into gaslighting themselves, wondering, well, am I too sensitive? Well, did I do that? Am I remembering it incorrectly? And it really just pulls the rug out from under them and turns the whole context of any given situation upside down. So with all of these examples, it's clear to see that DARVO is a strategic tactic an abuser employs to remove accountability and responsibility for their actions, and at the same time placing the responsibility or blame for a problem on the victim. DARVO ultimately allows the abuser to control the narrative and preserve their image at all costs. So it's not only that their narrative is changed between the perpetrator and the victim, but it becomes shared with outsiders, which is such an overwhelmingly traumatic experience for the victim, to be mischaracterized publicly and to be blamed for something they're not responsible for. It's slander. It's very difficult to overcome that. So I want to pause here for a moment and check in with you to see if you relate to anything that I've said today so far. Have you experienced DARVO? Have you known it was DARVO when it happened? Or did you experience any of these things that I've separated out and are now realizing that you experienced DARVO? So please place your comments in the chat now, and then we'll share a few of them anonymously. I'd love to hear your comments. Like, did you relate to anything I said? And I'd love to know if you were able to identify when it happened that the narrative was being flipped around on you, or did it cause you confusion and you gaslight yourself and it just increased your stress and trauma because you weren't able to see it clearly? Believe me, most people can't see it clearly. It takes years for them to be able to sort it out because it's so confusing and manipulative. So don't feel bad. There's no shame here. This is a judgment-free zone, but it's helpful if you share your thoughts for everybody's benefits.
Yes. Okay, Annette, I'm going to read these to you real quick. And then we do have some questions if we want to pause now and
sure.
Some of them. Okay, so here we go. Yes, I'm going through it now. Another person said, I have lived this every day for years. I feel like Annette has lived in my house for the last 5 to 10 years. And while you were speaking, several people were saying how this is so validating and so familiar, and we're really relating. Someone said, I didn't know what this behavior was, and he did all, in all caps, of this to me.
Mm.
Yes, but I did not know until I became a DV counselor. That as a therapist, I see this often with victims of domestic violence. someone experienced all of them. In fact, recently a friend utilized almost everything. It helps to decipher relationships, healthy versus unhealthy. And Annette,
Yeah.
that is one of the questions that somebody had asked is how it can be used in different types of relationships. And so this person pointed out how a friend did that. So we do want to acknowledge that, yes, it can be in any type of relationship.
Absolutely. It can be in the workplace. It happens with kids on the playground with bullying. It's amazing how a young child can instinctively use DARVO as a defense mechanism so that they want to target and get the other child in trouble rather than them taking responsibility. So even at a young age, it's something that is instinctively known as a defense mechanism.
Yes. All of this is amazing info. This is very helpful. Everything you say, I relate to. I was very confused, but I didn't understand until it was over 24 years of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Try not to beat yourself up for that, because it is so common that we hear from people who spent decades in a relationship and they just were not able to discern what was happening. It was so confusing. And that has largely it's because all those confusing behaviors that I listed just a few minutes ago, and there's so many more, many of those behaviors will be used in one conversation. So you have so much coming at you that is not rooted in reality, that is meant to confuse you or to pull the rug out from under you and topple you over. And so it's hard to find footing when you can't even see the patterns of behavior because there's so many behaviors being employed against you. If it was only lying regularly, and I don't mean to minimize the effects of lying, but if somebody lied and that was the only behavior, you would be able to say, this person is not trustworthy. They have a pattern of lying. You would identify it. But when there's multiple behaviors, it's too hard to find the patterns. So you go to self-doubt. Like, is it the way I'm communicating, or I must be unlovable, or so many other self-doubting messages? That's what we tend to go to before we're able to really discern this person is manipulatively employing these tactics against me, and I'm not seeing it for what it is. So I just wanted to say, don't be glad you recognize it now, because it stops the confusion from this point forward. Okay. Is there any more questions, Jill?
Well, there's 30 more new messages.
Oh, Guy.
Of people relating, and I only laugh because I think sometimes, Annette, it's hard because sometimes you can see the chat, sometimes you can't, and so I wanted to make sure you knew what was happening over here. It's now almost at 35 new messages that I have.
Okay, well, let's just go through a few that maybe we'll just talk about. We won't say the same mess. If people had the same message, we won't repeat that.
Okay.
But I'm so glad you're engaging. Thank you, because it just really makes it so much more enriching for everybody who's listening. So thank you.
This is good. There's so much here that's amazing. And as I scan it, I'm just going to read one to you. It says, 100% I have experienced all of these. He claimed in court that I lived my life in a fearful way. I was able to calmly explain that I do not live my life that way, but his behavior causes fear. So good.
That's a very layered comment. There's a lot of depth to that. I'm glad that you were able to remain calm and describe that, because so often when statements are made like that in court, it causes a traumatic response and you start to cry or lose it. And that just discredits you. Unfortunately, judges and lawyers don't recognize the signs of trauma. They categorize you as being unstable or possibly not telling the truth, and you're caught. So I'm so proud of you that you were able to stay calm. That's a wonderful example for everyone to follow who has to go to court.
Annette, in addition to what I've read you, there's now 40 new messages. So I might have to pause because in order to read them, I'm going to take time from you.
Okay.
But can I ask you one question that was asked right away? Maybe you can address it real quick. I thought it was a great question. It says the abuser won't do this with others, i.e. coworkers or my children. So can they turn it on and off, DARVO?
Yep, absolutely. Great question. It's interesting because some abusers, there's different categories of narcissists, which we don't have time to get into today. Maybe that's something to do for a future workshop. But for the most part, it's the most intimate relationship that gets the brunt of narcissistic behavior. So the spouse, or if it's an adult child and parent and they're living in the same home, turns into elder abuse, things of that nature. But it's the most intimate relationship where they're having daily contact. They're talking about interpersonal things that those things don't really ever get touched on in your friend group or in a work environment. Things are a little more superficial unless you have some really close friends where you are able to critique one another, compliment one another, and, help each other be your best self. But a lot of friendships are not like that. So it comes out in those intimate relationships. And so they're able to not treat other people that way. Some do treat everyone that way, but for the most part, that's not the case. It's exacted. Those behaviors are employed against the primary intimate person in their life. Okay, so should I move on? I guess I should.
Yeah, I'll save the next questions for the end. Go ahead.
Okay, so obviously DARVO manipulation has severe implications for the mental and emotional health of the one on the receiving end. The impact may also significantly impact the survivor's physical health over time, because that ongoing stress that one is experiencing when they're gaslighting themselves, when they're being blamed for everything, and the confusion causes stress. So this level of conflict and discord and the confusion creates a high level of stress where cortisol and adrenaline are pumping through your endocrine system on a regular basis. And it starts to affect one's physical health. So you have autoimmune illnesses, you might have unexplained medical illnesses that are really significant that physicians have a hard time pinpointing. They're stress related. It doesn't mean that they're not. You can get cancer from a large amount of stress. There's still problems that need to be dealt with medically, but if you could just eliminate the stress, you would see a vast level of improvement rather quickly, because stress is so toxic. So your endocrine system responds to stress, and it's as if the only way to eliminate that stress is to really gain clarity of your situation and remove yourself from the stressful environment. And some who don't choose to make that decision, they have to disengage. So they have to become, there's a term called gray rock, where you just don't respond. You have no expectations of having your emotional needs met. And when there's a conflict, you avoid responding. You just stay like a gray rock and disengage, which can help a person cope with the environment by lowering their expectations and not falling into the vortex of an impossible conversation. So it's not uncommon from all this stress for victims to have complex post-traumatic stress that develops, which exacerbates your emotional and physiological symptoms. So I want you to be aware of that. And maybe you need to do an assessment on yourself to see if you have a complex post-traumatic stress. It's something that you should find out about yourself. You can Google it and pretty easily determine if you have PTSD or complex PTSD. And then I would encourage you to get the proper help to overcome it, because it requires a lot of work, and it's really important for your physical health that you get a handle on it. So to determine if DARVO is being used against you, there are various signs that you can be aware of and look for. For example, when you're vulnerable and bring a concern to your partner, you may suddenly feel shame or blame. You might be confused with the words that are being used because you're being gaslit, but you'll notice it in your body. Your body may tense up. Your jaw might tighten. You might get sick to your stomach, butterflies in your stomach, or tension in your upper neck. Your body is basically responding to a trauma response. So having DARVO used against you is a traumatic experience. And I just want to make sure I make that really clear. Don't minimize the effects of DARVO. Understand how significant it is on your mind and body, and listen to your body. Because even though cognitively you might not be able to deduce exactly what's happening, Start recognizing the signs of your body. Your body will tell you what is happening. So you need to become really familiar with your body's responses. Get to know your body and your body's reactions. You may suddenly feel responsible when you're sharing a vulnerability. You sought an emotional connection and empathy, but now you suddenly feel confused and responsible. And you'll likely feel shame and a level of self-doubt. Maybe my perspective is off on this, or maybe the way I view myself isn't how this person views me, and they see me in not a positive light, or maybe I deserve this, or maybe I'm not a lovable person. Maybe something's intrinsically wrong with me. All these things can go through a victim's mind when they're feeling self-doubt. And you'll likely feel abandoned by the abuser or others who are witnessing the exchange. And you're not able to really put your finger on it, but you feel distanced. You feel like you're being put at arm's length. And then you might step into the role of apologizing and trying to appease and fix the situation. So I just want you to be really aware of those feelings of feeling shame, and then your response of trying to fix it and just taking on, minimizing what's really happening and just smoothing it over. I want you to be aware of that, because that's not good for you, and it's not good for the overall situation. It's a trauma response: fight, flight, freeze, appease. It's the appease or fawn. Some people say fawn. Okay, cognitively, if the conversation gets flipped around on you, it's a dead giveaway that DARVO is in play. So you can use your cognitive brains to say, okay, I brought up something. Now it's all of a sudden, I'm the one on the hot seat. Here goes DARVO. You might not be able to pinpoint exactly what's happening, but you can know, I'm not continuing this conversation. You're flipping it around on me, and I'm not going to continue this conversation. It's not what I brought up. Stay on topic. There's a number of things which we'll get into a little bit. So how can you respond if you recognize this in your communications, in your dynamics? What do you do? So depending on the level of safety or danger that there is in the relationship. So for example, if there's been physical abuse, or you're sensing that they're using their physical body to intimidate you, I want you to recognize this as a threat and to protect your safety above all things. So try really hard in that case. If you're in a fight mode, to not fight, to disengage and protect yourself from physical violence. So what I'm going to talk about, I want you to really assess your situation and recognize if there's that fear of physical violence, or if you've experienced physical violence in the past. I don't want you to poke the bear and create a situation of violence. So what you can do is firmly denounce their words and bring the focus back to where it originated. What I said was blah, blah, blah. You change the subject. I'm not changing. Let's stay on topic. What is your answer to this concern? And you just bring it back around. And it takes you being rather firm, and it might not feel comfortable to be that firm. Maybe you'd rather be, if you're a woman, maybe you'd rather speak more compassionately and feminine. But unfortunately, that often it's not taken seriously. So you have to ramp up your posture and be more direct and firm and showing resolve. That doesn't mean you're overly masculine or disrespectful or anything like that. I'm not saying to yell and go hysterical, but you be firm and show an unwavering posture. And that is perfectly appropriate when DARVO is being employed against you. You can say something like, your response is disingenuous, so I'm exiting this conversation. That's one blanket way to address it. You can also say, here's another example where you blame me for every concern I have. You become unreasonable when I reasonably approach you. So you can just name it for what it is. Or you can say, blame sabotages a conversation from being able to move to solutions. So can we not blame and just address the issues? They're either going to listen to you and take it or not, but it's your way of saying, nope, you're still blaming me. So there's no point in having this conversation because it's being sabotaged from the get-go. Or you can say, I don't share your perspective. You are blaming me rather than engaging in self-reflection. You're closed-minded rather than open to hearing my points of view. So there's no point for this conversation. Or you can say, you're being very manipulative. You can just say it for what it is. You're being manipulative. I can't say that word ever. It doesn't come out of my mouth right, but you know what I mean. So the best thing is to recognize that when dealing with someone who is entrenched in this kind of behavior, in other words, if this behavior is a pattern, it's best to call it out in a brief way right away and then disengage. Lower your expectations from expecting them to respond in a satisfactorily or authentic way. Get rid of your own cognitive dissonance. In other words, if you are expecting this type of individual to meet your emotional needs or to understand you and admit their fault or to meet you where you are about a general concern, this is cognitive dissonance. You are in denial. You are lying to yourself. You are not seeing things the way they really are. You are not recognizing what is authentic and what isn't authentic. So you're gaslighting yourself. I'm not criticizing you. I'm saying this is a common effect when someone is so deviant and gaslighting of you. A nice person, an empathic person is self-reflective. So they immediately go to examining themselves. Oh, did I do this? Maybe I missed that. We're willing to be wrong. We're willing to take responsibility, but an abuser is not going to go through that self-reflection process. It's all outwardly focused. It's all about outward criticism and protecting their inner self from being wrong and from feeling shame. They don't do that. And so it's so important that you not have cognitive dissonance, that you see reality for what it is and lower your expectations. You are not the problem and will not succeed in convincing them that you are correct. So don't think you're the problem, which is one step, and then don't think that you have the power to change them or to change their thought process. Only they can do that. And that takes a deep willingness to want to change. And if they're not motivated to change, they're not going to change. Why would they? They're winning every argument. They're not feeling your pain. They're feeling in control. They're not uncomfortable. So it's just not realistic to have what I call magical thinking, that things are going to get better, or that the apology this time is going to equate to change, or the false promises. You know, you've had so many broken promises that it's going to lead to change. So I want you to do a reality check. You will not be able to convince anyone who refuses to accept responsibility. So arguing or trying to convince them or finding this phrase or that phrase, a better way of saying it, is just entering the vortex of this dynamic that's going to leave you feeling unfulfilled, exhausted, and even anxious, because you're going to end up being blamed, or you're going to be rejected, you're going to experience the silent treatment, or you're going to be raged at. And all of those things are going to leave you feeling abandoned. Accepting this for what it is and disengaging is the best thing that you can do to protect your mental, emotional, and physical health. Having a reality check, getting out of magical thinking, seeing this for what it really is. Something is significantly wrong with the character structure of your partner. He or she has an entirely different worldview or way of thinking about interpersonal relationships and how they should function. They don't think the way you do. Like I said, one example of that, they don't self-reflect. They outwardly criticize. You're very willing to self-reflect. How can you function with somebody who won't self-reflect? Everything is one-sided, but that's just one way that their worldview is different. They're deeply entrenched with faulty and destructive thinking patterns and faulty beliefs that you'll not be able to correct, regardless of how thoughtfully you choose your words or what therapist you find to solve this problem in your relationship. Nothing you do will change your partner. You can only focus on choosing to change the way you engage in the dynamic, focusing on getting stronger, disengaging, seeking emotional support from anyone other than your abusive partner. Look at your situation accurately rather than through rose-colored glasses. Look for ways to restore your energy. Refrain from engaging in conversations that exhaust you. and that leave you feeling abandoned and alone, while you work on finding your voice and a more accurate perspective. And oftentimes that the best way to do that is to join an abuse support group, which you can do. There's so many options online or in your area, or you can do so through a good trauma-informed therapist. So before I close the workshop today, I want to affirm that you can keep yourself safe from DARVO. The key is education, space away from the trauma, and time to think clearly, to make a significant effort to reprogram your thoughts. Take the time you need to work on yourself and your healing, not on healing the relationship. And I'm not saying people can't change. I'm not making that blanket statement. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that nothing that you do to try to argue your way through and force them to hear you say it this way or that way it's not going to produce change. The only thing that's going to produce change is you taking care of yourself, being so aware and prepared for these kinds of behaviors so that you don't get stuck into this vortex of confusion and stress, that you can disengage. And if you want to try to save your relationship, I do know a therapeutic firm that deals with abuse. You can reach out to me privately at Annette@themenproject.com if you're interested in that. But I just want to let you know it takes years of work. There's no easy fix. It's very slow, arduous, and it's a traumatic process. So I don't recommend it, but it's a personal choice. And if you want to find more about that, you can reach out to me. The most important takeaway from what I've stated is to recognize that you too likely have faulty thinking patterns, or said another way, like I mentioned before, magical thinking. When we allow another person to rewrite the narrative and believe it or doubt ourselves because of it, we're allowing another person to interrupt our gut intuition. We're allowing this person to gaslight us, or we gaslight ourselves. We have, in essence, lost ourselves. When we get to this deeply lonely place, we have to work on reprogramming our cognitive thinking. We need to realize that we're not responsible in any way, because abuse is a choice. It's not an accident, and it's never the victim's fault. This is not a marital problem. This is an abuse problem from one person directed at another person. No issues can be remedied as long as any form of abuse is in the relationship. We have a workshop on self-love deficit and a separate workshop on self-love abundance. I highly recommend that you watch these workshops that are housed on our YouTube channel or on our website on self-love abundance, where I walk through the concept of and steps of self-love recovery, where you can get rid of that self-doubt and really begin to love yourself the way you deserve to be loved. Dealing with a narcissistic abuser can do a number on your mind and body, leading to serious self-doubt, low self-esteem, and bring about this sense of powerlessness, where you almost want someone else to rescue you. But really, you're your own best rescuer. You are your best advocate. So you have to work through finding love for yourself and really empowering yourself, which takes time. And there's a procedural way to get there. So I hope that you'll go to the workshops. I also want to let you know that we have a curriculum, we have a course that I would love for you to take. The course is going to really build yourself again. It's going to reinstill a healthy level of self-confidence. You're going to learn to love yourself deeply and understand all these complicated components that enter into an emotionally abusive relationship. It's called our self-paced course, and you can find it under training on our website. It's 4 modules, and each module is between 2 and 3 hours, an hour of reading and a 1 to 2 hour recorded session with me. And this class has been beta tested. It's an excellent course meant to educate victims and survivors and to help you save about a year's worth of therapy processing through all of this stuff. Because that first year is usually spent ruminating over all these different things. And this will eliminate your need to do that. It will really jumpstart you on your healing process, so you can then maybe enter therapy in a much more aware and confident spot, so you can work on the later stages of healing rather than that first year where you don't really get anywhere. It's just talk therapy. This is going to jumpstart you on that. So I highly recommend, and it's very inexpensive. It's only $57. It's so much less than even one therapy session. And if you are being financially abused or can't afford it, we do offer scholarships. We don't like to turn anyone away. So I hope that you will sign up for our course. It's taught with compassion. It's judgment-free. And whether you decide to stay in your relationship or leave, that's a choice solely up to your discretion. And when I founded MEND, it was my dream to be able to provide quality information, quality education, especially for those people who couldn't afford therapy. And so many therapists are not trained on emotional abuse. So they actually do more damage. So I wanted to have a website that was comprehensive and have a training curriculum that would really help jumpstart victims, give them accurate information, and jumpstart their healing journey. So that's it for today's workshop. If you have any questions, I would love to take them right now.
Annette, we have several people commenting about the course and how beneficial it has been and how helpful it has been.
Thank you.
Annette, there are several questions and I've captured them all so that I can go through them quickly with you. The first one you had mentioned about, and this was early on, Annette, about the need for the abuser or the person who's using DARVO to preserve their image at all costs. And why do they need to do that?
Okay, so we have a tool that we call the pillars of abuse. And basically the pillars, if you think of a pillar, it upholds a structure. So the pillars of abuse describe what upholds the structure of an abuser's character. And what those points are is a faulty belief system, which would be something like patriarchy, where a man really believes he's in the dominant position or the hierarchical position. They don't believe in equality. They believe that they have the right to power over the female person in the relationship. It's part of their upbringing or their social circle, or maybe it's part of their religious teachings, but it's deeply embedded thought process. The next pillar is called entitlement. They believe that they are entitled to double standards. So in other words, rules that apply to you don't apply to them. You can't go buy a dress, but they can go buy a car. That's an over exaggerated version, but that happens too. And so they just believe, like, you might work full-time, they work full-time, but you need to cook the dinner and clean up and get the kids in the bath and get them tucked in while they sit and watch TV. That's the way it is in a lot of cultures. It's part of their belief system. It's their identity, and they don't apologize for it. So entitlement, that's another, every abuser will have a sense of entitlement about something that is negatively impacting the relationship. The next pillar is image management, where they feel so insecure and uncomfortable with their emotions and your emotions that they put on a mask and act away. They know how to act so that other people accept them and validate them. And so their energy is put on other people affirming them and being pleased by them. And this can look very different in different microcultures. So the way, let's say, a machismo Latinx person would act in a very old school microculture, let's say it's a neighborhood of a lot of tradition, and it's that patriarchal or machismo attitude has been going on for generations. They're going to act that way and fit right into that culture, but maybe they wouldn't fit into another microculture a couple cities away or something like that. So it doesn't have to be just one belief system. Every culture brings its different biases, unconscious biases and conscious biases. So you'll have to just size up your situation. But image management is very much a part of what they focus on because they're so insecure. They know they need to work on appearing a certain way, even though it's not authentically who they are. Then the last pillar is a low emotional IQ. They're not comfortable with their own emotions. They're not comfortable with your emotions. They don't understand emotions. It gives them anxiety. And so they have a low level of emotional intelligence. Those are the 4 pillars. Next question.
Yes. Are there any reliable assessments that a court would accept that can be done to help break the back and forth accusations in the use of DARVO?
I mean, the only thing that I can think of, and I'm really not an attorney and I'm not trained in law, but usually it's a 730 evaluation where you have a court evaluater, a psychiatrist, or someone of that caliber doing an analytical deep dive into each person, and they would possibly be able to see narcissistic behaviors, but narcissists are very convincing, so that's not always the case. I think if I were to give any advice, I would say to document everything, to find emails, text, don't get rid of anything, and just clearly lay out the facts in a calm way. If you have the opportunity to lay them out in court, a lot of times they won't hear from you, but I would go by what you have documentation to prove and not something that you can't really verify. I would focus on those things. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Annette.
You can also go to a website called Coercive Control Consulting. She has a lot of tips and short webinars on how to handle coercive control in the courtroom. It's a really good website.
Fantastic resource. Yes.
Yeah.
Somebody was there, as you can imagine, the chat is very full. It's wonderful and beautiful. And this community is unlike any other I've seen, just so validating, comforting, and listening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for participating.
Yes. One of the gals noted that it says, I was just reading all of these comments and wondering again how I can know I wasn't the abuser. The whole thing is so confusing. He acts so nicely now that we are only talking on a supervised co-parenting app. Oh, he acts so nicely now that we are only talking on a supervised co-parenting app. And so she's wondering, how can I know that I wasn't the abuser? And that is so common, right?
Yes. So the first thing I'll say is rarely will an abuser say, I wonder if I'm the abuser. They don't self-reflect. Remember, I said that several times during this workshop. They're not willing to be wrong. They aren't an empath. They're not capable of interpersonal empathy. They might be able to be empathic towards pets or towards outsiders, but in their interpersonal relationship, they are not showing empathy. They are not self-reflecting. They are blaming. They're placing you in the abuser position. And you may have reacted abusively. You may have gone into the fight mode. I know that was what I would do. I would fight. I would argue and say, that's not true. And I would just get sucked into that vortex, and I would stand up for myself. And an outsider looking in might view it as I was the problem because he was more calm, but his words were very pointed and meaningful and dismissive of me and very abandoning and judgmental. So if I expressed a feeling, he would negatively judge my feelings and say I didn't have a right to feel that way or whatever. So I would react to have my voice. So you might think, okay, I reacted and that's not my normal self. And look at how I just behaved. That doesn't mean that you're the abuser, because even the National Domestic Violence Hotline says that there's no such thing as mutual abuse. The mindset of the person reacting is not trying to power over and control and manipulate the other person. The mindset of the abuser is to cause confusion, to manipulate the outcome, to power over, to control, to oppress. It's very different motives. So looking at yourself, do you intend to power over and control? Do you tend to oppress? Do you tend to dominate? Do you tend to not believe in equality? If those are your beliefs, then maybe you're the abuser. But I would guess that simply by the fact that you are willing to question yourself, you're not the abuser.
So good. So good. It's such a great question, and it's so common. Yeah. And I love how you answer that every time. Okay, Annette, can you speak a little bit more about how we gaslight ourselves? This person says, I've been speaking with my counselor about it lately, especially about how stonewalling causes me to doubt myself. So can you speak a bit more about how we gaslight ourselves?
Yeah, it's kind of deep in a way. I mean, just cognitively speaking, we adopt the narrative that the other person is speaking to us. They're convincing, and we are less secure, less confident. So we adopt their narrative. And we doubt ourselves because we're willing to be wrong. And we have a lower sense of self-worth. So the part I want to say that's deeper is what I would like you to do is look at the relationship that you had with your primary caregivers. Did they really encourage you to express your emotions? Did they validate you? Did they affirm you? Did they build you up? Did they say, you can be anything you want to be? We're standing here with you. And if you had a concern or if you had a fear, they sat through and let you talk it out. Most people who have a low sense of self-worth had parents that were emotionally not available, less available, or had a punitive parenting style where there was shame-based, like you're a bad girl or boy, or punishment. You know, if you express an emotion, you're so ungrateful. You know, they didn't say, well, tell me more about what you're feeling. So people that grew up with primary caregiver that were the way I just depicted are more likely to have a lower sense of self-worth, or if you saw domestic violence in the household, that sort of thing. And so it's really about going back and doing some work with your therapist about that relationship with your primary caregivers and really understanding your parents may have had some good parts, but some really bad parts that affected you and affected the way you view yourself. My parents were emotionally unavailable. They were very present physically and would drive me all over the place to gymnastics practice and whatever else. But emotionally, I was not allowed to express my emotions without getting in trouble. So I grew up not trusting my perspective because it hadn't been validated by an adult. And that could be something similar that you're going through where you don't trust your perspective, you automatically go to self-blame. And that's a form of gaslighting because it's not rooted in reality, but it is deeply rooted in a faulty belief system that you have about yourself. So to you, it's very real, even though an outsider objectively looking in would say, this is not rooted in what's actually happening in this relationship. He is being a total jerk and she is blaming herself. There's a big disconnect. But then when you hone in on who you are in that relationship, you don't have a lot of love for yourself. You don't have a secure footing on the ground, believing in your cognitive ability to discern what is actually happening. So I hope that makes sense. There's a book called The Human Magnet Syndrome that will address some of this that is worth looking into.
So good. And somebody said, Annette, you are so articulate and it is so helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for the affirmation.
And they're asking, can you mention again the website, Coercive Control?
That's Coercive Control Consulting. I think it's Diane Cocciola. I don't know how to spell her last name, but Coercive Control Consulting. And she has webinars and she has like graphs where she says, you know, in a court setting, don't say these things, do say these things. You know, she breaks it all down. If you spend some time on her website and dig for the answers, you'll find a lot of information.
This one is about complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And somebody is asking, how do we find out if we have CPTSD and what are the most effective treatments if we do?
Well, what I would do is normally I wouldn't say go to Wikipedia because you can have any number of different authors and it's hard to verify if something's true. But Dr. Judith Herman, who is a psychiatrist at Harvard University and has a trauma research center, she is actually the author of the term complex post-traumatic stress, and she wrote the Wikipedia page. So you can actually go there and learn a lot from the Wikipedia page. She also wrote a book called Trauma and Recovery, which is a really good book about trauma. And we have a workshop on PTSD and CPTSD that I would go and listen to. But basically, healing requires a lot of work, and it's probably too much for me to answer in a question. But it's things like removing yourself from the traumatic environment, or if you can't remove yourself from an abuser, emotionally disengaging and really just do not have conversations that are deep with an abuser, and start to stretch yourself to find safe people that you can share a little bit with. I wouldn't overshare with anyone because they're not going to have the capacity to really stay engaged with you for how long it might take you to process. But if you had a smattering of friends that you could check in with, this one for a half an hour, that one for a half an hour, that are safe and fully aligned with you. If they're not fully aligned with you, they're not people to confide in. You need people who really have your back, who are totally believe you and who support you. And if you can't find that, I recommend a support group or a therapist. Taking our course will really help you heal from complex post-traumatic stress. And then taking steps to stretch yourself, to step out of isolation. So put on your tennis shoes and go for a walk outdoors. I remember being in a place when I had CPTSD where I did not want to go outside. I was so afraid I would see somebody because I was so traumatized by double abuse, people judging me and mischaracterizing me. I was completely petrified and I was just stuck. And so to actually start stretching myself and taking an exercise class, I started taking Pilates and yoga. It really helped me because I would see the same familiar faces and I would start to have these safe, friendly relationships. It was really uplifting. It produced endorphins, doing exercise and seeing familiar faces who were kind, and we were all enjoying what we were getting out of the class. Things like that is really helpful. Activity cures depression and activity produces endorphins around safe people. And so doing physically active things, getting in touch with nature, any kind of self-care that you can do, a massage, a pedicure, soaking your feet in hot water, taking a hot bath, going for a walk, like I said, going to the beach or to a lake and walking the shoreline, listening to music, singing along with it. Anything that you can do that brings you joy will help you begin to heal. And it's so much harder to heal if you're in isolation. So it's really important to find safe people. That's why I love support groups. Everybody's going to be able to identify with what you're going through. No one's going to judge you. No one's going to say, well, did you try this? Or, well, why didn't you do that? No one's going to ask you inappropriate questions. It's just going to be a supportive environment. And I think those types of things really help.
So, Annette, do you have any suggestions on how to tell mutual friends and or children what led to the demise of your breakup in a way that protects you but doesn't give too many details?
Oh gosh, I've thought about this so many times. You could say, I don't know if you're a male or a female, but if you're a female, you can say, he knows exactly what he did to cause the demise of our relationship, and I'm just not at liberty to discuss it at this time. You can say that, or you can say there was a lot of very controlling behavior and nothing I did was satisfactory. And so you can just say, and that's really all that I feel comfortable discussing at this time. You can say it like a little, if you want to. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. You can just say, I appreciate your question and wanting to know. I just don't feel comfortable talking about it at this time. There's nothing wrong with that. Or you can say a little bit, you can say, if you want to learn what I've been dealing with, it's called covert emotional abuse. You can look it up at the Mend Project or, give them a website. And if you want to know, but it's too exhausting to explain. And right now I would rather avoid talking about it and just own it, by saying as few words as possible. So I hope that's helpful.
So helpful. And I love the permission to not say what you don't want to say, to be honest. And
I want to come back. Yes, I totally agree with you, Jill. The only thing is when you did mention kids. So depending on the age of your kids,
yes,
I think they deserve to know more of what's happening if they're of age to understand. And you could go to our website on tools and resources and download our terms and definitions. And it's a free PDF. And from that, you can describe the kinds of behaviors that you regularly dealt with and how it stopped any opportunity to resolve conflict or to come to solutions. It was a way of stonewalling you and making sure no problems ever got resolved, and that a healthy conversation mutually listens, mutually respects, and has a desire to want to understand the other person's point of view, and then you work out solutions. But that's not what you experienced. And over time, it just became so stressful that you started developing trauma responses, post-traumatic stress. Your body started feeling exhausted, and you just need to take care of your health. It's not healthy for you to stay in a situation where there's no sign of improvement, no matter what you've said and you've tried everything under the sun. I think if they want to hear, it's helpful for them to understand rather than to be confused and question. It's something that's worth explaining. And Jill, I don't think we have our maze of confusion on our website, but
yeah, I can drop it here in the chat as well.
Okay, this is a really good tool to use along with the terms and definitions that illustrate. It's a metaphor for a conversation. It illustrates what it's like to be in a conversation with an abusive person. We call it our maze of confusion. The maze represents a conversation, and all the dead ends that you hit when you're trying to have a conversation with an abuser. And every dead end represents a behavior like stonewalling, deflection, denial, lying, blame shifting, minimization, etc. And that's what it's like to be in a conversation with someone who is abusive. And it's a very good visual tool to help convey that in an effective way. Yeah. Is there any other questions?
You actually answered the last two together. And
okay.
So I kind of supported it in the chat here. We did drop, just so everyone knows, there was a link to the course that was dropped today, a handout with the terms and definitions, the maze of confusion. So if anybody has any need for more resources, please email us at info@themendproject.com, or any questions or anything. Annette is so personable, and I'm just going to say this on your behalf, Annette. I receive a lot of the emails and questions and stories, and Annette loves to know our community. So if you have anything you want to share or ask, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll do our best to be come alongside you and listen and be supportive.
Yeah, I try to look at every email personally and create a response that is personal to you, that takes time and heart, because we care about you and we want you to feel supported, and we don't want you to languish in confusion or stress. We want to try to ease the stress that you're experiencing. So we do take every comment seriously. So that's it for today. I hope that you'll join our course and get the benefits that it offers, which are so thorough and uplifting and comprehensive. And I hope that we see you at our next month workshop. So until then, what I really want to get across is that you take really, really good care of yourself. Take advantage of self-care. Force yourself to do it. It'll be worth it, because you're worth it. Okay, bye-bye.